Hello, both. I am here with Joel Bakken and Jennifer Abbott of the new corporation, The Unnecessary Sequel. Um, Thank you for joining me today. Maybe we'll start with a brief introduction from each of you, please.
Sure. I'm Joel, and I directed with Jennifer Abbott and wrote the new corporation, The Unfortunately Necessary Sequel.
Sorry about your title.
And I'm Jennifer Abbott, and I directed with Joel Bakken, the new corporation, The Unfortunately Necessary Sequel.
So first, thanks for confirming the title. It's a bit of a mouthful, but also very necessary because it is unfortunate, but also necessary. So I understand that this is, sort of picking up where the original left off from 2003. For those of tuning in, The Corporation was the original documentary that came out. And this is also kind of a follow-up, but I'm also curious if it was also based on the new book that you also put out, Joel.
Yeah, it was based on the ideas from the new book, but I think it was truly a collaborative process, the film, and it really, I mean, those who are listening to this or reading this will probably share the sense that we felt that the world is really in a lot of trouble in some ways that it wasn't in the early 2000s. I mean, we had climate crisis then, we looked at it in the first film, but it's gone from being a crisis to being a truly existential crisis. And one can say the same about the state of our democracy, about racial and economic inequality. All of these things have gotten worse. And I think that it's been a qualitative shift, not just a quantitative shift. And that's why we decided to make this second film. It's not simply a case of revisiting what we did in the first, but of showing that our society has really changed in some ways that are highly problematic, that we've gone from being a society that contains corporations to one that increasingly is contained by corporations. And that a lot of the very dangerous trends that we see happening are the result of corporations growing power and influence in the world.
Very true. Did you want to add anything to that, Jen?
Well, I would, of course, agree with everything that Joel has said. And, for me, I was reluctant to do the sequel, but I think the triggering moment was Trump's election. And for me, that was because, everything seemed to be accelerating so fast into this despairing place, and Trump sort of blew that open, and even the veil came down, and the pretense that governments and corporations were acting independently was taken down, and all of a sudden there were really compelling reasons for me to do the sequel.
Yeah, and I think I think it will also reach different audiences as well, because maybe a lot of us had sort of become complacent. We already knew from the original documentary that corporations were troublesome, but now there's this immediacy to kind of maybe act up and become more informed and maybe become more activist within our limits as individuals. So I kind of wanted to touch upon that, like in terms of I watched the film with a friend, and we're both viscerally affected because it is, the reach of the corporations and the blurred lines with governments is quite clear. So, in your own opinion, how do you envision, us as audience members and sort of taking the information that you're giving us and go with it and do something? Like what was the goal in terms of getting us to wake up, if you will?
I think one of the really important features of this film and the story in this film that is different than the first film and that is aimed at that question is that we really wanted to make it clear that while since around the time of the first film, corporations have sort of changed their image and have said, you know, we're the good guys now. We're going to solve the world's problems. We're no longer going to create them, and you should rely on us. And so part of the audience we're speaking to is those people who will be attracted to the idea of wanting to change the world. And what our message to them is, don't rely on corporations to do it. Don't believe that they are the ones to lead us to a better world, because they can't, for all of the reasons that we talk about, and they won't. And so it's that kind of myth busting that is a central feature, because I think a lot of people genuinely want to do good in the world. A lot of us as citizens, as consumers, we want to do good. And part of our message is that we have a lot more power as citizens than we do as consumers, that we, you know, how we choose to buy and what we don't buy, and whether we, you know, go with this corporation because they seem good. This is not going to be the way towards a better world. We really have to engage in our democratic institutions. And so that's a central message of the film. It is not enough simply to be a responsible consumer. It's not enough to applaud these big corporations when they say they're going to do a little bit of good. And we need to really be wary of the larger game they're playing, which is trying to leverage this new image to gain more power over us and over the world, and take us further down this road that is not a good road to be going down.
Yeah, I would just add to that, you know, the silver lining of the immense crises that we face is it's really calling into question the institutions and the systems in our lives. And because it's calling them into question with such ferociousness and intensity, you know, we can look at the Black Lives Matter uprising, or we can, you know, we just can choose from all many different crises, and just to the legitimacy of the institutions and the systems that are socially constructed by us are being called into question. And so the silver lining, I think, of that is that we really have so many people who are asking questions at the deepest level. And that, you know, taps into what Joel is talking about in terms of, you know, what does it mean to be human? Are we simply consumers, or are we going to be engaged citizens? So, you know, while things have gotten so bad, it at the same time is this extraordinary moment. It's an extraordinary juncture. And so there's also extraordinary opportunity. And I think that we hope that one of the messages of the film is to show the opportunity that this moment presents.
I think so too. And it's also, you know, it's evident from seeing the film that it's also, you know, it was sort of finished during the time that COVID sort of started to hit across the globe, which also kind of adds to this urgency that we need to sort of rally ourselves and, you know, take some action. I'm curious about, you know, in the post-production side of things, if there was anything, you know, when you're sort of putting the final version together, something that just sort of surprised you, either an interview or a tidbit, and sort of you had to add into the film.
Well, I think it's what you were just talking about, COVID and the uprising in the wake of the brutal police killing of George Floyd. You know, typically as documentary filmmakers, you can't continuously chase the world as it unfolds. At some point, you have to say, we're not a current event show. We're trying to give some kind of bigger picture about how the world works that will have a long shelf life. So, you know, every little event that happens and everything that you read on the front page of the paper, you can't keep on adding to your film as it goes. But COVID and the BLM uprising were both not just events that you read about in the paper. These were large, just world-shifting events that we're still are part of, and that are still unfolding. And so, you know, those, we really had to, on 2 occasions, I mean, we thought we'd ended the film when COVID hit, so we had to reopen the film. And then we thought we'd ended it after we built in the COVID content, and then the uprising happened. And so both times it wasn't simply a case of, oh, that's an important current event. That is a crucial shift that illustrates many of the themes we're talking about in the film. We have to get it in.
Mm-hmm. And Jen, anything to add about the editing process, given the circumstances of, you know, thinking you have one version ready and then you're going to add more material?
It's a great moment to do a shout out to our extraordinary editor. I didn't edit this film this time, Peter Rowick. And, you know, I think for me, and I know Joel shares this sentiment, is that it was really only with the BLM uprising that we felt like the weight and the, you know, of the latter act sort of could rise and feel as significant and as powerful in terms of its groundswell of resistance to challenge corporate rule. And so for us, it really shifted the entire film to be able to include the BLM uprising. And another thing I think about COVID, which isn't touched on as much as it perhaps could be, and why we also wanted to include it, was that, you know, in addition to laying bare the injustices of the system, it also in many ways showed us our humanity. It showed us how we could be there for each other. It showed us our altruism. It showed us that we cared about more than just the economy, that we could put life above the economy. And so, you know, both COVID and the uprising were just, as Joel says, they were not like current events. They were like monumental. And while, of course, there's so much suffering related to COVID, and so much suffering underlies the reasons the uprising happened, they both have these elements that really speak to our humanity and I think call out the best in us. So very, you know, in terms of the narrative arc of the film, both in content and emotionally, they were both absolutely crucial.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of, as much as we have some great information leading to that part of the film, it sort of is what's what I, in my personal view, it's sort of like a catalyst of, you know, this is where we're at now, and again, is this call out to either, like, you know, you have to pick a side at some point, right, and become more involved. So I do appreciate sort of that sense of urgency, because, you know, I've seen the original and now this one, and I appreciated the original for what it was, very informative. I appreciated the part of this version of the documentary in terms of the analogy of the, you know, the psychopath and the corporations kind of matching that criteria, but also this sense of there's more to just consuming information. Now we got to do something about this information, just like you said earlier. So I do appreciate the pacing of the film. I know there's been, I was reading some comments about, or some of the reviews, I should say, about, you know, how the pacing may not please everyone, but I think it's sort of, that's the nature of the world that we're in right now. And I don't know if you want to add any comments to that.
Yeah, I think it's a fast-paced film. It's a bit of a roller coaster ride, but I also, I mean, so it kind of starts in a narratively not as fast way, and in the middle of the film, it really does move quickly through a lot of material. But part of what we're trying to show is how these things link together. So there's a certain method to that madness, especially as we're going through the playbook, and we're showing how there are all these different things that are going on. Each of them in and of themselves could, you know, take an entire documentary to look at, but we're really trying to look at this from 33,000 feet up, you know, to give a sense of how the dots connect. And so, yeah, I think that is why it sort of moves quite quickly through certain parts.
Right. And my other sort of curiosity kind of question is, there is, you know, I like this, as I mentioned, I like the style of the film. Do you think this also would appeal to wider audiences? Because we're used to a lot of sound bites and images on social media. You know, a lot of these content is available at our fingertips. So, you know, I'm wondering if that was also a conscious effort in terms of post-production, or it was just the way that the film came together.
Well, yeah, I think that, you know, with the first film and the second film, we don't shy away from complexity. And I also feel we have a tremendous respect for our viewer. You know, we're not trying to dumb anything down. And I think that, you know, depending on your experience, your education level, and all kinds of other factors in your life, you know, maybe you'll get some things and then there'll be some layers. You know, it's a layered, I hope a layered and a nuanced exploration of the issues. But it seems to me that in terms of audience and how broad the audience might be, you know, these issues are infiltrating more and more circles, right? As the despair or the discontent or the exposure of the injustices are touching more and more people directly, they become more and more interested in these issues, right? I think that the Bernie Sanders movement and support for the issues he spoke of is really testament to how those kinds of progressive issues are infiltrating more and more the mainstream. And similarly with our film, I mean, I think the first film actually was really embraced by, you know, we got great reviews from Fortune magazine or The Economist, or, you know, perhaps publications you wouldn't necessarily expect that from. So, you know, I think that because it's like we're very rigorous in terms of our fact checking, we really do so much background research and reflection on every issue we present, that, you know, it's not as easily dismissed by people of differing political backgrounds, because, you know, even if they may not agree entirely with every sentiment, it's difficult to disagree with the film's main ideas because they're very thoroughly and rigorously researched and presented.
Right, and I, you know, I'm understanding that there's a lot of research involved in making these kinds of films because they're very investigative in nature. You know, having so much information at your fingertips yourselves as filmmakers, what makes you, walking away from making this film and now it's out into sort of film festival circuits, what are you hopeful about, knowing what you know?
Well, hopeful that this will encourage discussion and debate, and most importantly, questioning. I mean, I think everybody sort of gets a lot of this stuff across their Twitter feeds and Instagram and Facebook. You know, we're all inundated with stories of corporate wrongdoing and corporate harms and whatnot. But what we're trying to do in this film is create a meta-narrative, create a story about how it all fits together that isn't just another soundbite. I think a lot of people think they know exactly what's going on because we all feel informed because there's so much information. But I think what a documentary like this can do, or a book like this, is it can say, here's the overall arc. Here's the overall analysis. Here's the overall story. It's a story about corporations seeing the writing on the wall, seeing that their legitimacy was in doubt in the early 2000s. So they stepped up their game, or they purported to. They said, we're better now. Mm-hmm. But actually they hadn't changed at all, except in a few behaviors and a few rhetorical strategies. And they've leveraged their new image to become more powerful. And we really can't rely upon them to save the world in the way that they're saying they can. And so we have to rely on democracy, and we have to make democracy work better. So So that's the story we're telling, and our hope, I think, is that story goes out there, and that it changes maybe how people think. It causes them to ask questions. It maybe confirms some of the ways they're thinking. It challenges some of the ways they're thinking. It maybe challenges their sense that all they have to do is be good consumers, and causes them to think, gee, maybe I have to think about what it means to be a citizen in a democracy. What responsibility, as well as what rights, does that carry with it? How should I exercise those rights and equip myself of that responsibility? So, you know, that is the hope with something like this. And I think that by putting it into this fairly compact narrative, the hope is that it kind of shocks you, maybe, as you suggested when you were watching it with your friend, that it knocks you back a little bit and causes you to kind of get out of the soma that you might be in, and think, wow, we really do have to do something here. We're in trouble.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I would hope that it would open up the imaginative space to consider that, you know, the institution and the system that we're currently embedded within, it's not just the way it is, right? And that we can, and it has felt that way for a long time now, but you know, you can see, again, infiltrating mainstream discourse, a real challenge to 21st century extractive capitalism, a real challenge to the outsized power of corporations, a real challenge to, you know, I mean, many different institutions. And I mean, that's most overtly witnessed in the United States right now. So, you know, I would really hope that people would walk away from the film sort of being able to conceive of another way of being in the world, and you know, just sort of understanding that this is not the way it has to be, and that notion in and of itself is very liberating and can lead to transformative change, both individually and within the system.
That's great. I think that's sort of what I wanted to say, but you said it more eloquently. So now, you know, having heard this wonderful, sort of hopeful way of looking at the film, it also makes me hopeful too, in terms of how I can be part of this bigger picture as a global citizen, because I may exist in one city, in one country, but, you know, there are ripple effects, right? So moving forward with this film and what its impact can be, I realized that you're going to be showing at the Vancouver International Film Festival. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And also at Double Exposure Investigative Film Festival.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure all the festivals were showing up, but I think there are quite a few.
Okay, so
Yeah.
So there is a life after TIFF in terms of the festival circuit, and there is a website that I will be attaching to my social media and the website as well, so that people know where to find more information about the film, how they can get a copy of the book as well. And
yeah, I mean, I think it's important. We're still in the midst of figuring out what kind of a distribution life this film will have, and it's also broadcast. It will be broadcast by Crave. It's a Crave. Crave is our broadcaster, and so that will happen in about 6 months' time. But between now and then, there should be some kind of theatrical release, and we're still in the midst of figuring out what that will look like.
Excellent. So that's good news. So I'll be sure to plug the website as well. I think it's thecorporationmovie.ca.
The new corporation dot movie. Yeah, dot movie.
I thought I had all my notes ready, but I appreciate the correction. So again, thank you both, Joel and Jennifer, for joining me today. The name of the film is
The New Corporation, The Unfortunately Necessary Sequel.
And thank you all for listening to this wonderful conversation.
Thank you very much, Heidi.